Welcome to NBA Jam Tatman QC on Fire Edition. Boom shakalaka.
Happy little games. Any retro gaming fan who grew up during the 16-bit wars definitely had their favorite system. Typically, it would come down to a certain game or even a genre to make that system stand head and shoulders above the rest. For the most part, players were either in the Nintendo camp playing titles such as Super Mario World and F-Zero, while the Sega side saw players spinning out of control with Sonic the Hedgehog and riding majestic beasts in Golden Axe. Today, the game we are going to check out has its roots in another arcade classic. The name of the game is Streets of Rage. This title is fondly remembered as having some pretty spectacular music, two-player simultaneous gameplay, and in general was just a whole lot of fun to play. Why was this game created in the first place? How does the game Fighting Force factor in? So tighten up your headbands and crack your knuckles because this is the history of Streets of Rage. The beat-em-up genre had found great success with 1984's Kung Fu Master, but what blew everyone away was 1987's Double Dragon. In the late 80s, two of the biggest arcade manufacturers were running neck and neck for supremacy. That's not taking away anything from other companies such as Konami, but Capcom and Sega titles were just a little bit better than everything else. Altered Beast and Golden Axe were extremely popular for the Sega side, while Capcom was taking everyone down to Hagar Town with Final Fight. Upon its release, Final Fight was a phenomenon with its large sprites, two-player simultaneous action, as well as innovative level and enemy design. Both Nintendo and Sega had introduced their 16-bit consoles, and Nintendo wanted something that players had enjoyed in the arcade only exclusively for their 16-bit unit. Exclusivity is the key, as Nintendo locked up the rights to Final Fight fairly quickly, with no other company allowed to touch the sacred Final Fight license until Sega brought it to the Sega CD in 1993. Sega saw all those dollars slip through their fingertips, and it also gave Nintendo a huge advantage when it came to exclusive content for the Super Nintendo. All Sega could do was knuckle up and create their own 16-bit sprawling, brawling beat-em-up adventure. Final Fight on the Super Nintendo was an awesome conversion, but it was hampered by the development time as well as the available ROM space. The arcade original featured 10 enemies on screen at once, whereas the Super Nintendo could only display 3. The industrial level was also missing, but the most glaring omission was the lack of two players simultaneously. It had also removed the character of Guy, which left only two selectable characters, Cody and Hagar. Sega saw these shortcomings, so when creating their brand new title, these issues would be addressed. The original game was designed by Noriyoshi Oba, whose work was obviously influenced by Final Fight, but also, believe it or not, American TV such as the A-Team and Starsky and Hutch. To see what made Final Fight tick, he actually bought his team a Super Famicom and dissected it, which he said helped greatly with the creation of Streets of Rage. He wanted to do everything bigger, badder, and better, and more in line with what fans loved of the original arcade version of Final Fight. This included two-player simultaneous action and 3 characters to choose from. Each character would have their own unique attributes and movesets as well. The music was composed by Yuzo Koshiro, who wanted to place a lot of emphasis on the music being energetic and exciting. Initially, he was going to use rock songs for the soundtrack, but instead switched over to electronic dance music, and in particular, house and techno. Mr. Koshiro was one of the first to introduce this type of sound in video games, which would go on to define the genre. Something else that the game would do better than its contemporaries was the amount of moves per character. The game would feature nice tight controls, multiple endings, tag team moves, boss fights, spectacular graphics, excellent level layouts, and of course that oh so sweet music. In Japan, the game was known as Bare Knuckle, but it was almost known as D-SWAT. This was to let players know that it took place in the same universe as the arcade title E-SWAT. To back this little fact up, both police cars look very similar. While this game was content in ripping off Final Fight, they also had no problem ripping off Karnov as well. The enemy, Bongo, is a bald, fire-breathing Russian. Abadade is a clear Ultimate Warrior knockoff right down to the fact that he can't speak either. Souther has claws similar to Wolverine, etc. When you eat the food, the same sound is made when Pac-Man eats the food bonus in the original arcade title.
The largest and hottest library of 16-bit games plays on Sega Genesis, featuring Streets of Rage, the fighting game that'll knock your socks off, with 40 individually controllable attack moves, and a neighborhood crawling with punks, muggers, and urban slime. Streets of Rage, only on the 16-bit Genesis system from Sega.
Streets of Rage barreled its way onto the Sega Genesis in 1991. As the story goes, an evil criminal syndicate has taken over the lovely town of Wood Oak City. Despite the police department's best efforts, nobody can get a handle on the ever-growing situation led by the mysterious Mr. Twitter. I mean Mr. X. Corruption runs high in the government, so it's up to 3 individuals to help take back the city. The game is a 1 or 2 player simultaneous beat-em-up that sees you take control of one of 3 characters. These include Adam Hunter, whose special ability includes boxing; Axel Stone, who is our resident Cody knockoff and is proficient in martial arts; and finally Blaze Fielding, whose love of judo is second only to her love of the lambada. The game takes place across 8 levels or rounds in a wide variety of settings. Among those variety of levels, you will encounter a number of unique enemies as well as boss fights. Fans of Final Fight will have no problem picking up these controls. The B button is your standard attack, C button is for jumping, and if all else fails, you have a special attack which is the A button. Similar to other fighting games, you have an energy bar at the top which depletes with the more damage you take. Also listed at the top is the number of lives remaining. There is a bit more technique involved over Final Fight, which also helped set the game apart. Tapping the punch button near enemies starts off a basic combo. While moving in close, you can grab and hold them. After holding on to them, you can punch them a couple of more times and toss them to the side like a sack of dung. One very cool move is you can vault over the grabbed enemy. After doing so, you can perform an even more powerful attack from behind. If an enemy gets behind you and grabs you, you can kick an opponent who is directly in front of you or flip the person who just grabbed you. It's pretty seamless in its execution, and it adds a little bit of depth to the standard beat-em-up. There are even tag team moves available. If you find yourself overwhelmed and about to keel over, you can always unleash a special attack. A police car will drive up and unleash Hell on Earth. The special attacks are not character specific, so if player 1 requests assistance, then the cop car will drive up and launch Napalm. If player 2 asks for help, then he receives rocket-powered grenades. These can only be used once per round. It just wouldn't be a beat-em-up if there weren't a number of weapons. These include bottles, knives, lead pipes, baseball bats, and even a pepper shaker, which is apparently on loan from Peter Pepper. There are loads upon loads of breakable objects in the game, which usually include something tasty. Apple and beef will increase your health, there are 1-ups, and even cash and gold, which will give you an increase in your score. As I mentioned, the game takes place across 8 levels or rounds, including City Street. Inner City. Beachfront. Bridge. Aboard ship. Factory. Freight elevator. And the final level, Syndicate Headquarters. Some of the bosses you have to contend with are Antonio, Souther, Abadede, Bongo, Onihime and Yasha, and finally Mr. X. Speaking of Mr. X, the final stage, instead of attacking you straight away, a dialogue box pops up with you being offered a position in Mr. X's syndicate. If you say no, then it's on to fight Mr. X. If you accept his offer, it turns out to be a trick, sending you back to the factory level. One cool twist is that in a multiplayer game, if one player accepts and the other player does not, both players will have to fight each other. It's a nice little element which gives it that much more depth. After taking care of Mr. X, the credits roll by with some fantastic music in the background. is a bad ending in the game, and it only happens when two players are fighting against each other. After defeating the other player and you still refuse Mr. X's final offer, if you go on to defeat him, you become the new leader of Mr. X's criminal organization. The game had a couple of different releases on the Sega CD. The first game appeared in the Sega Classics Arcade Collection 4-in-1, which included Columns, Golden Axe, The Revenge of Shinobi, and of course Streets of Rage. The more notable of the two is the Sega 5-in-1 compilation. This included Columns, Golden Axe, Super Monaco GP, Revenge of Shinobi, and Streets of Rage. The reason this version is notable is that Sega decided to redo the voices, allowing for a much cleaner sound. The oh so uber sexy music was not touched. The game was a huge success upon its release and has spawned a number of merchandise over the years, including action figures, t-shirts, coffee mugs, and dioramas. The music was so good that 3 different soundtracks were issued. The gang made an appearance as a comic series that appeared in issues 7 through 12 of Sonic the Comic. Since this was a Sega-created property, it only appeared on a couple of different systems. The Master System version looks pretty good, although there were a few downgrades. For starters, there is no co-op mode, so this is strictly a single-player affair. Only 3 characters can appear on screen at once, and that includes your player. Everything else is also a bit slower than its 16-bit big brother, but with what you are left with is still an excellent Master System game. There is lots of attention to detail in the backgrounds, including the rolling waves on level 3. As far as the audio goes, it includes some really good 8-bit renditions of the Genesis tracks. It's also fun to play, although not quite as intense as the original. The Game Gear version tries its hardest to compete with the Master System version, but it just can't get the job done. Axel and Blaze were the only 2 characters to make it over, but this version does include co-op via the link cable. This game only has 5 stages instead of 8, but they look decent for the most part. The graphics have a ton of detail, with even some backgrounds having a good amount of animation. With this version, there are 4 characters on screen at once, making for a bit more difficult game. The collision detection, though, is not so great. Sometimes your basic combos will connect, while other times you are punching ghosts. Also, your special attacks are missing completely, so it's solely up to your knuckles to get the job done. The game has been included in a number of compilations, including the Sonic Gems collection for the GameCube and PlayStation 2, Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection for the Xbox 360, and even a TV plug-and-play unit from At Games, which included all 3 Streets of Rage. There was a Streets of Rage collection that was released on Xbox Live, and finally a 3D version of the title was released for the Nintendo 3DS. I never had the chance to experience this version in person, but from what I've read, the 3D effect was among the best of the Genesis titles. Even while the first game was in development, plans were already afoot for a sequel. Streets of Rage 2 was released in 1992, and once again, everything is bigger, badder, and better. This title is considered the benchmark in the franchise, and when people are referring to the series, they are often referring to this one. The code for the game has been rewritten entirely, so everything feels just a bit snappier. This time around, you have 4 characters to choose from, with 2 new additions, including Max Thunder, who is a pro wrestler, and Skate, who is Adam's kid brother. I guess the situation is so intense that they have no problem sending a kid into warfare. The fabulous foursome are even more diverse this time around when it comes to moves and attributes. The moveset of each character has also been increased. If you enjoyed the giant-sized boss sprites from the first game, then you will be pleased as punch to learn that all the sprites in the game are about the same size. The police car special is no longer here, however each character does have a couple of personalized special attacks. The animation and even the backgrounds are more detailed and everything looks great. The music is in a class by itself and is once again composed by Yuzo Koshiro. If you would like me to do a deep dive on this game or any of the titles in the series, please let me know. A couple of years passed until we finally received Streets of Rage 3. This title was not as well received as the previous effort, but it was still fun in its own right. This game was completely butchered when it was released here in the States, with most of the storyline and cutscenes removed. The gameplay itself feels to be an extension of Streets of Rage 2. There are still only 4 characters to choose from, with Axel, Blaze, and Skate returning, alongside Dr. Gilbert Zan, who was a cyborg and was previously involved with the Syndicate crime organization. One of the biggest additions is that each character now has a run option. This will allow you to roll upwards and downwards, helping you evade those nasty individuals. Each character has a small meter that will recharge, allowing you to use special moves without costing precious health. The Blitz attack from the previous game also returns and can be upgraded 3 times for more damage and longer range. There are lots more interactive backgrounds, including one where you are attacked by a bulldozer. Once again, there are multiple endings, which adds to the replay value. Something else of note is a lot of the palette was changed between the Japanese and American versions. Not only that, but there was also a flamboyant gay man who fights you in his green chaps. Apparently, Sega of America thought Americans would find this offensive. We don't get the character of Ash, but we do get Rue, who is a boxing kangaroo. Overall, the game controls great and features some excellent music. When it was released here in the States though, they decided to ramp the difficulty way up, making for one difficult game. The series would lay dormant for a few years until Core Design attempted to pitch a brand new 3D version for the Sega Saturn. It started out life as a half-completed game entitled Judgment Force, which Sega planned to turn into Streets of Rage 4. Everything was going along just fine until Core decided to release the title on every major console and not just the Saturn. Sega was adamant that this would be a Saturn exclusive, which Core would not accept. At this point, Sega bowed out of the deal, so Core went ahead and finished the game as Fighting Force, which was released for every major platform including the Nintendo 64 and Windows. The only platform it was not released for was the Sega Saturn. A very cool unofficial remake was released for Windows in 2011. The ingenious title of Streets of Rage Remake is a blend of the original 3 games with 12 selectable characters. The gameplay is very similar to Streets of Rage 3 with the blitz attacks and special weapon moves. It also reintroduces the police car special. A number of options can also be adjusted to make for an even better gaming experience. The levels are large and vast and even feature branching paths. Also included are sections where you drive a jet ski and a motorbike. Something else that was added to this series for the first time is that characters can now use firearms. The music is excellent and it controls great. If you are a fan of the series, you should definitely check out this loving remake. Sega finally realized the value of their old IPs and started resurrecting these brands, and the finest among these would have to be Streets of Rage 4, which was released some 20 years after the last Genesis title. First off, let me say that developer .mu did a fantastic job. The game features 21 playable characters including Axel Stone, Blaze, and Adam Hunter. New characters who were brought to the fight include Cherry Hunter, Floyd, and Estelle. Once again, each of these characters were given a more diverse moveset and attributes. If you don't like the new updated HD graphics, then there are sprite versions of the characters from the previous titles. This was a cool little feature that I found myself returning to time and time again. Pretty much every enemy from the previous 3 games make their return and they all look fantastic. The backgrounds are excellent with lots of special effects and parallax scrolling. The music was done by a number of composers, with the highlight of the pack being the original sound designer Yuzo Koshiro. As far as the controls go, the game plays more in line to Streets of Rage 2. This time you can perform juggles and combos. Enemies can bounce off the walls, and you can now hit enemies who are knocked to the ground. This game was clearly a love letter to the original series, and as I stated, they did a fantastic job. They even released a DLC pack titled Mr. X's Nightmare, which adds 3 playable characters and 2 new gameplay modes. If you were ever a fan of this series, you should definitely check this game out. Streets of Rage 5 or Streets of Rage Revolution has also been announced, which will feature full 3D gameplay unlike all the previous titles. Streets of Rage is a series that stands the test of time. With the recently announced Streets of Rage Revolution, people will be enjoying this franchise for a long time. Where the obvious comparison is with Final Fight, in my opinion, this series expanded upon the gameplay and level design a lot better than the follow-ups to the original Final Fight. If you've never had the chance to bust up some phone booths all the while eating loads and loads of beef, be sure and give this series a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you can always click the donate button up above. Thanks everyone for watching.